Thanks everybody for showing up today. That's pretty cool. So the topic today is cybersecurity. We do a ton of webinars and discussions about cybersecurity all the time. So it's a topic I could talk about this all day, quite honestly. So that was the hard part for me, was figuring out how to fit all this into a relatively small window. But in any event, today we're going to talk about what can the little guy do. So I just want to give you a little background on myself. And I'm a little bit older these days than I was when Rob and I first met, right? But that I went to Case for college, and I came out of college with an electrical engineering degree, electrical engineering and applied physics, and I went to work in process control, and I did that for like 11 years. And that was a fun job. But I learned a lot about controls, and back in that day, all the devices that were OT devices were hardwired back to a centralized controller and all those things. But I learned a decent amount about that. But the whole time I was doing that, there was a peer group of mine and a group of friends, and we'd always been discussing about, let's start a business and what should it be and all these things. And we covered the gamut, right? Like, we were going to buy a bar, and we all decided, yeah, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. So in any event, we ended up starting a web development company, and this was in the mid '90s, probably. So that was .com boom. I don't know if anybody remembers the mid '90s, but it was an interesting, weird time to start a business. But it was cool because we competed with great big, large companies, and the CIO's nephew. We competed with everybody, but we were doing some pretty cool things, I think, from a web development standpoint, and the whole business model was just kind of evolving and those kind of things. So it was a pretty neat time to start a business. But the .com boom, as everyone knows, was followed by the .com bust, and that was not a very popular time to say that you're a web development company. You might maybe get shot at, right? So that's. In any event, there were a lot of people calling us. They were saying, hey, can you help us get more from our existing IT, right? It was a down economy. All these things were happening in the marketplace. And so we outsourced the infrastructure side of the business. We hosted all the applications that we built. We ended up building some internal software and various different things. So we're working with some pretty good sized enterprises and those kind of things. But we outsourced all the management of the infrastructure. And the VP of technology for the local ISP where we outsourced to, he was doing all of our IT anyway. So anytime a client would call me and say, hey, can you help us do such and such with our servers or this, that, or the other thing, I would call him up, and his name was Steve too, my name is Steve, so it was kind of funny. But I'd say, hey, Steve, can you go help a client of mine? He'd be like, yeah, sure. So I'm like, why don't we start a business that does IT, more traditional IT, right? So ASMGI stands for Advanced Server Management Group, was exactly what we did. We manage servers. And in the data center environment. So that's how SMGI came around. And we were really, I'll say, micro-focused on what we did. So we were managing servers. But the whole, philosophy and concept of IT service management and managed IT services was really early in the life cycle for that, right? So we came out of the gate as a service provider. This is what I tell people all the time. So our front and back office systems, all of our business was architected for services, right? So we didn't invent a new product or do any of those things. We're just helping people get things done. And that's what we did. So we started in the data center, Kevin, just so you know. So we grew a lot of familiarity with that environment, and we were very comfortable in that environment. And we work with a lot of different partners around the world, actually, in data centers and those kind of things. But in any event, that's where ASMGI came from. Since then, we've grown the breadth of our service offerings. So from offering just core IT services as IT service management, the tools and processes and technologies evolved, as well as people's mentalities and the things that were driving business at the time, right? So we evolved from just managing servers in our data center to pretty soon managing servers that were on premise or on site or remote, and then managing desktops and really the full suite, the full gamut of IT services. And from there, GRC is a term I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but governance, risk, and compliance is what that stands for. It's really the consultative side of cyber. So we launched a practice in that in 2009, got really, really good at it. So we were adept at all of the different frameworks and controls, writing policies and procedures and those kind of things. So I'll say the consulting side of cyber, we were really, really good at. And then I always knew we'd introduce software because I used to be a software company, right? So that we'd introduce software back. So IT and IT services, GRC and cyber operations. So now we do the full operational side of cyber as well, and got pretty adept at that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more today. But software development lifecycle. So we wanted to differentiate ourselves and not be just another, I'll say, custom application development shop, if you will. And it would be very difficult to compete at that level with other custom application development shops because there are a lot of them, right? And a lot of them are overseas, right? But from an outsourcing standpoint, I mean, the rates are so low. So we chose to focus on the process or the life cycle. We call it SDLC, or the software development life cycle. And now when we can integrate the infrastructure side of the business, the cyber side of the business, and the software side of the business and pull all of that expertise together, those are the things that really get us excited. So we're doing some pretty neat things in that space today. So the background I gave you a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening today in cyber. It's probably not much of a surprise to most of you. And then my top 10 list for the little guy. What can you do today in cyber? And then we have a giveaway that we'll talk about as well. But okay, here we go. So cybersecurity. Cybersecurity should reduce cyber risk. I mean, that should be a goal of cybersecurity, right? So people today are spending boatloads of money on cybersecurity. Over $120 billion today is spent on cybersecurity. Microsoft alone spends $1 billion on cyber. JP Morgan Chase, a large bank, 3,000 people in cybersecurity alone, $600 million budget, $600 million. I mean, the amount of money that is spent on cybersecurity, it's just phenomenal, right? People are spending buku dollars. Is it really lowering the risk? 87%. 87%. It's just mind-boggling when you think about it. 87% of leadership feels ill-prepared for cybersecurity. It's mind-boggling when you think about it. Why is that? I mean, why are people spending all this money and not getting a return on that investment, or not getting an outcome that's doing what it should, like lowering their risk, right? It's phenomenal when you think about it. And it leads us to believe that there's an effectiveness problem, right? It's you implement security controls, are they effective? And that's something that I think is really important to think about. Is it effective? And the answer is today, not really, not so much. I mean, we're losing. A lot of people think we're losing the war with the bad guys, right? Ransomware is phenomenal. We're going to talk a little bit more about ransomware. If you look at the stats from 2020 in ransomware, just look at the spread across industries, right? So here's your first pop quiz of the presentation. Does ransomware care what industry you're in? No, all industries are targets. The bad guys, all they want to do is get paid, right? They don't care. They want to inflict pain. They want to make it hard, right? And so ransomware used to be encrypt all your files. And then, the bad guys, you can just envision them laughing, right? Hey, I encrypted all these files. Imagine getting that screen when you show up for work Monday morning and saying, hey, you have ransomware. Imagine the panic if all your files are encrypted. But that's not enough today, right? Today, the bad guys are exfiltrating data. They're stealing data from these companies. They're saying, listen, pay us the ransom, or we're going to start leaking the data for your customers, for your people. A law firm was recently breached. they have files on like Lady Gaga and Bruce Springsteen and all these people. And they're like, hey, pay us the ransom or we're going to start releasing this data, this information to the public. It's phenomenal. But it doesn't matter what industry. And so what are the main causes of a breach today? The main causes of a breach are open RDP ports, right? Poorly configured ports. Open RDP ports was the number one reason that companies were getting ransomware until recently. Phishing actually took over as number one. But open RDP ports. But if you think about misconfigurations or just various different open ports, that's a huge problem, right? And the bad guys, they go buy these ransomware kits and it says, step one, do this. For RDP, if you want to exploit an RDP vulnerability, just go buy a kit for it for $100. And it says, step number one, do this. Step number two, do this. Step number three. You don't even have to know what you're doing. It's a recipe, right? Software vulnerabilities. Software vulnerabilities has moved up the value chain from an attack vector standpoint. So we see all kinds of software supply chain attacks going on, like SolarWinds. Everybody's heard about SolarWinds. It's a very public breach. The bad guys attacked SolarWinds and they implanted some software into their life cycle. They implanted some software and they knew that SolarWinds, they've got like 15,000 customers. Well, 15,000 customers were probably affected by this. They have a lot more than 15,000 customers, but they via Kaseya, this is another very, very common breach. $70 million was the ransom asked for in the Kaseya breach. But this is an IT service management platform that a lot of people use, right? And they manage servers, right? So they have admin level access to these things. Plant vulnerabilities into the software in the supply chain where there are a lot of different customers. So we see software moving way up the list. So there are all kinds of processes to make sure that your software is secure. Like DevSecOps is a common practice, but what I want everybody to think about is the trend in the industry is called shifting left. So DevSecOps, it means shifting left means security, moving it farther upstream in the processes, like making it not an afterthought, but a forethought, right? Think about how to do things more securely at the beginning of the process, not at the end of the process, right? So a very common scenario that we see all the time in the enterprise, like the business builds an application that has all kinds of value from a business standpoint, right? It'll make them more efficient, it'll do all these things, right? We're gonna save buku dollars. And then they go to security at 4 p.m. on a Friday and say, hey, can you sign this? Because we need your signature to release this into production and we're making it live at 5 o'clock. And security's like, what? Like, how is that even possible that you would wait until now to have this conversation, right? So in any event, software vulnerabilities we see moving up. Phishing attacks, we hear about all the time, right? So we've heard it said for at least 2 decades, probably 3 decades. This is the password example that you gave, right? But phishing attacks, this social engineering aspect, it used to be when you got a phishing email, I laughed a lot of times because I'd read an email and I'm like, that's a phishing email, right? Broken English, all these, it was clearly not what it said it was, right? Clearly, not today. Today, disguising yourself is a key, right? So I get emails from UPS, from Office 365, from Microsoft, all the time that are phishing emails. They look authentic. They have a logo on them. They have a signature on them. The way I look at it is if nobody's willing to put their name on an email, don't do anything, right? $70 or $37 million. So one supplier for Toyota, they were convinced by the bad guys to change their bank account. This was a senior executive in the finance department. He deposited $37 million to a fraudulent bank account. Somebody got him to change the bank account. $37 million. That's pretty serious. That's a lot of money. Okay, I'm asking myself, like, why would anybody do that? Well, the reason people do it is because we're distracted. We have like 1,000 things going on. There's a story of a guy, like a common phishing attack is go buy gift cards and Xerox the front and the back of the gift card and email it back to me. And there was a time when the CFO of a company sent an email to this person that asked him to do that. He walked right by a conference room that she was sitting in and went out and bought gift cards, like thousands of dollars of them, and Xerox the front and back and emailed it. It was a bad guy. It was fraud. It was, in any event, these things happen all the time. So I just want to make this, our philosophy is to change the outcomes, we need to change the way we think, right? So we say all the time that the old way of thinking is very point solution. This is, I talk about frameworks. Sometimes I love frameworks, right? ISO 27000, there are all these frameworks around security. ISO 27001, NIST. NIST has got a lot of things going on. HIPAA, a lot of vertical industries have specifics around, frameworks and those kind of things. One of the risks is I think it creates a false sense of security. You say to somebody, are you secure? And they say, here, I've been certified by ISO. Here's my report, right? Somebody came in and did an assessment on us and those kind of things. That's a very point solution. If you implement those controls and don't validate them, you do control number one and you implement it like a project, right? Start and finish. And then you move on to control number two and you move on to control number three. And pretty soon you have the whole framework done. And then, maybe even get a pre-assessment and then, then you say to the people, hey, here's my ISO 27001 report. I'm secure. No, you're not. Did you ever validate that control number one even worked before you started on control number two? And any of those things. So the point solution mentality can create a false sense of security. It can be very fragmented and very point solution oriented, right? Implement this solution, then implement this solution, then implement. We think a better way is to think more holistically. And I'll go back to the first slide. The goal of cybersecurity should be to lower your risk, improve your security posture, right? That doesn't happen all the time. We see a lot of people spending a lot of money on security and not getting the outcome and those kind of things. So one of the things we talk about at ASMG all the time, our internal brand for bundling is called One Team, and we use One Team solutions a lot of times, but a total solution, which is One Team, has to include the program. The program outlines the strategic objectives and why are you going to do this anyway, right? So this is like what the return on the investment should be identified as part of that, right? But all your SLAs and SLOs or your operating agreement or what you expect for outcomes, the desired outcomes or desired results, they should all be defined in the program. Plus the technology, plus the operations. And this is the operations is the part that we see a lot of people like break down right on. Somebody, the way I define operations is somebody has to show up at work tomorrow and actually do this, right? I always use as a metaphor this one commercial I saw. I think it was an IBM commercial. There are two consultants sitting on one side of the desk, the customer sitting on the other side of the desk, and the customer's reading this report. He goes, yeah, this all sounds good, do it. And the two consultants look at each other and they start laughing. He wants us to do it. Somebody has to do it. You either have to do it internally or just, outsource it if it's not a core competency. Somebody has to do it, right? So we see, anyway, the opposite of that, the antithesis of that is the point solution mentality, right? We see a lot of people fall flat on that. So another way to say this is instead of a tools mindset, right? Buy more tools, buy more tools, buy more tools. The technology is not going to solve problems. The technology is a useful tool, right? Just the picture carrying a toolbox around. The hammer You can't pound a nail. You can do it with a rock or a brick or those kind of things, but it's more efficient. It's better to have the tool, the right tool, right? That it's better to have that, and that's the role technology should play. But it isn't going to make the nail get pounded in by itself, right? Somebody has to do the operations. Somebody has to actually do it. So NIST, I think it's nice to think about, instead of just shifting the thinking from point solution to more holistic, to think about it in this regard. And if you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's got a pretty good structure from an operational standpoint, right? So you could call this an operational aspect, if you will. So I think it's good to show. So this is the, drum roll please. This is the whole thing. So what do you do as the little guy? The first thing is use strong passwords, right? That it just sounds so obvious, but how many people, you don't have to raise your hand, but you can. How many people use the same passwords for personal sites as for business sites? How many people use their business email as a username for personal things? It happens all the time, right? Well, the problem is those personal sites get breached constantly. Even business sites get breached. Like I had, how many people have heard of the dark web? This is the marketplace, where usernames and passwords are for sale, right? For pennies, right? But they are for sale. And this is the marketplace where data goes when it gets breached, if it wants to be sold. We probably all have something on the dark web. I know that I do because I get reports about log into a site and, hey, you're part of a data. There are passwords that I have. Adobe got breached. This has been several years ago, right? But I had to log into Adobe. A lot of us use Adobe for our businesses, right? I had to log into Adobe. The username and password were both on the dark web, right? My password was on the dark web. It's just phenomenal if you think about it. Use strong passwords and change them. Have a policy around changing passwords and those kind of. The challenge is, there are so many places to use a password that we have to log in. How do you remember all this stuff? Do you write it on a yellow sticky and stick it on your computer? Well, that's easy, but probably not secure. Password management software, right? Privileged access management software. There are a lot of different ways to solve this problem, and we can talk about that another time.
On some passwords, I use one password and there's other options.
Right.
I realize one password people are broken into, but is that a reasonably good tool to help?
Yeah, 1Password is a reasonably good tool, and a lot of people use 1Password, and it can get broken into. And so people all the time say, well, what happens if the password management platform gets broken into? Then all my passwords are out there. So you got to change them. Hopefully detection is critical, and we'll talk about this too, but detecting, being aware of bad things are happening all around us all the time. This isn't a cybersecurity thing. This is life, man. There are bad things happening all over the place. It's important that we're aware of those. And as a startup, as an entrepreneur, it's critically important that we're aware of what's going on. Security awareness training. Phishing emails is the #1 attack surface these days, right? For now. I think software is going to actually move ahead of phishing as the #1 attack vector, because there are a lot of things going on from a software attack standpoint. Security awareness training is critically important. And what I like to talk about a lot of times when I talk about security awareness training is you have an opportunity as an entrepreneur, if you're embarking in a startup in the evolution of your business, make security culture important now, right? Make it important when there are 3 people in your company, not when there are 300 people in your company, right? That's make it important now, and make sure everybody understands why. Why shouldn't I click on a link in an email? Like, what's going to happen, right? So I think today we're starting to associate clicking on a link in an email with getting ransomware, right? But just think about, how do you even know if it's a phishing email or not? Where do I send it if it's a phishing, if I have an email that I don't know about?
Quick question, please. I've been aware of organizations do the training, but only when you're new, as opposed to ongoing.
Yeah, so this is the difference, I think, between checking the box that, okay, we did training. But that's a great point. So a lot of people, the HR department owns security awareness training, and when a new employee is hired, they get security awareness training, right? Security awareness training, I remember this. We used to do custom security awareness training. It was a PowerPoint presentation. Not today, not anymore. This stuff, there are all kinds of statistics around training. 80% of what we learn, we forget within minutes. 80%. When you get up and walk out of here today, this stuff, you're not going to remember what I said, right? You're going to remember how you feel. That's so in any event, 80% of what we learn, we forget. So security awareness training, the concept today that's real popular in awareness training is micro-learning. 2-minute videos, 2 minutes. Watch a video, do it again in next week. Watch another video, right? Again, 2 minutes, that's it. Not 1 hour, not a 1-hour presentation when you're a new hire, right? When you're a new employee. But I think it's very important to constantly make people aware of all the different ways that bad things can happen. But it's a critical point. And then the other thing I talk about a lot of time, like doing it in a managed fashion. Who has time to do all this stuff, right? Most people don't. And that's why security awareness training happens just when a new hire comes on, because there's an onboarding process that they have to go through, and they got to sit through all this training and blah, 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 do all these things, check that box, check that box, check that box, right? It needs to be continuous, fully managed. That's an option, right? There are a lot of solutions for fully managing security awareness training. But who in your organization can decide, like, what training should people get? And how do you craft a phishing email? Like, there are a lot of tests that go on. So most of the software or most of the tools that train for these things, we work with a partner that has a library of thousands of different videos. How do you pick the right ones, right? That's so do it in a fully managed fashion. Physical security. So here's another area that I think is important. Like, don't leave stuff laying around, right? Most of us, or many of us, have been working at home for significant time, right? Some of us have not. So our desk at work applies. But most of us have card swipes on our doors. Our offices are locked and those kind of things. But there are people that are in our office off hours. Don't leave a list of healthcare patients on your desk at home or at work. Don't just clean desk policy. It's not hard. I get it. I don't have a clean desk, right? Einstein said, clean desk. We all know what Einstein said, right? Messy desk, messy mind. What does a clean desk mean? That's empty desk. What does an empty desk mean? Whatever. But in any event, physical security applies to a lot of things, but there are a lot of steps we can take that aren't going to cost any money, right? So this is the other thing. Security awareness training, buy a solution. I think we can spend a little bit of money. Strong passwords, zero money for that solution. Physical security, unless you buy a password manager, right? That's physical security, not money. There are certain aspects of it that require some investment. Encryption. This is, I get heartburn whenever I hear about, like, somebody left the credentials off their S3 bucket and they had all this data that was stolen. Like, why wasn't it encrypted? I just can't even believe that it's 2021, almost 2022, and people still aren't encrypting their data. Just encrypt it. Encryption at rest and encryption in transit. There are two requirements that are part of a lot of different security frameworks. And a lot of times, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but if you're a startup and you want to do business with somebody, know what the requirements are going to be, right? Those are the controls that you need to put in place. But most people have a control around encrypting your data and those kind of things. Two-factor authentication. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. This could easily be number one. And the reason is, like, you can't get an insurance policy today without two-factor authentication in place. Absolutely not. Won't happen. So two-factor authentication means instead of just remembering a password and you log into a website, it's when you log into a website, it sends a passcode to your phone or some other factor, right? I like phones because we all have them, and I can't find mine right now. So, but if I had a code, it would probably come to my phone, and then I have to enter that as well, right? But two-factor authentication. So, I get people say, yeah, but the bad guys can crack two-factor authentication. Sure, they can, but will they? Most times, no. If I'm going to log into a website, and anytime we can implement two-factor authentication, we do. But there are a lot of our customers, especially in healthcare, they require it. And insurance companies require it. So I was on a panel for Cleveland State, I think in the spring of this year, actually. One of the questions, there were two insurance people on the panel. Is there any drivers, anything that you're refusing to write a policy for somebody or to offer a policy? Two-factor authentication. It was a unanimous answer. And if anybody has a cyber insurance policy, rates are going up, there's no question. And two-factor authentication is required. It's absolutely required. So anyway, that's number 5. Number 6 is endpoint security. Now, I say this with a little bit of trepidation because if I was a startup today, I don't think I would have any endpoints, to be honest, right? Just put everything in the cloud. You can do a virtual desktop and just use a dumb terminal. It's very difficult to breach something that doesn't have an operating system, right? We all know that operating systems have a lot of vulnerabilities and they have to be patched and fixed and managed and all those things. So, but endpoint security, these 6 items I would call base level security. Like, you should always have these. If you have servers or laptops or anything with an operating system, make sure you have endpoint protection on them. And what's interesting, like today, it used to be antivirus, right? Antivirus was required. But antivirus, the technology of antivirus is signature-based, right? So it's always historical. It's always, if something bad comes out, then somebody says, hey, here's a hash of the bad stuff, right? Here's a signature for that bad stuff. Let's put it in our database and look for that signature. And if you see that signature, if somebody clicks on a link in an email and downloads a file, and if it has that signature in it, block it. Don't let it install, don't let it propagate, don't let it do all these things. Antivirus, that's old technology, right? New technology is more about behaviors. It's more about behavior analytics, right? If somebody tries to download a piece of software, look, first of all, is it known, right? If it's unknown, then pop up a question, do you really want to install this, or those kind of things. But in any event, antivirus software is more about anti-malware today than it is about like viruses, and we could have a whole conversation about that. Vulnerability management and patching. So this is another thing. It can be hard depending on what industry you're in. So IT, OT, we do a lot in OT, but because my background is process control, right? So I know that world really well. I own steel-toe boots and a hard hat, right? So that's I don't mind going to the plant floor and talking about OT, but securing OT is critically important, and understanding how do you do vulnerability management for OT though, right? So there's some costs for 7 through 10. There can be some costs involved, but it's important to do this, right? We call this a preventative measure. And by prevention, what I mean is, like, don't leave vulnerabilities intact, because the bad guys, they attack vulnerabilities. I forget what the stat is, but it's 80+% of attacks happen on known vulnerabilities that have been around for 10+ years. It's phenomenal when you think about it. Just patch them. Microsoft comes out with patches once per month, right? Unless something is really, really critical. And then they'll do what's called an out-of-band patch, and they'll come out more often than that. But every piece of software has vulnerabilities that show up. And tomorrow, tomorrow they'll be different than they were today. There'll be more of them. Cloud security. So this is important because a lot of us are moving workloads to the cloud. There's no question that a lot of people are moving workloads to the cloud. And if I was going to do a startup today, I don't know that I would invest in buying a server versus buying a cloud technology. I'm pretty sure I would be cloud first as a startup today. But we see a lot of data breaches that are like S3 buckets, misconfigurations of S3 buckets, which is, for those of you who don't know, that's the storage, that's where people build databases and put data on Amazon, AWS, right? One of the more popular, the big three public clouds, the biggest of the big three public clouds. Tremendous amount of breaches happen because by default, the configuration of that is to leave the password generic, right? And the bad guys know this, right? So they just walk in and take the data. It's public. It's public data. So check the configuration of your cloud environments, right? Run what's called cloud security posture management. It just checks configurations. It says, hold on a second. There is a way to do this. You know, Microsoft, the big three public cloud providers, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, most cloud security posture management software will run on any of those environments and check the configurations and tell you if there's a problem. Number 9, software security. So this is really important, and it can include costs, right, to implement solutions. But it's important that people who are either building custom software or even, like if I was a startup today, I probably would use SaaS platforms for everything, include like accounting and all of these things. But are they secure? Like ask them what does their software development lifecycle look like? The federal government has mandated via executive order. So the president wrote this himself in May of 2021, 12 months to implement these things for anybody who does business with the government. Software bill of materials, an SBOM, what's known as an SBOM. In manufacturing, bill of materials, like you can't buy a part or a component or a manufactured item without seeing a list of components. There's always a bill of materials, right? In software, not so, right? There's a lot of software that includes components, right? So I think about if I was a software developer today, my managers tap me on the shoulder like every 10 minutes saying, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? I'm not writing, inventing new ways to write every line of code. I'm saying, hey, form validation, there's an open source component that already does form validation. I'll just use it, plug it in. 1,500 components. That's the average for a custom developed app. 1,500 components. There's a way to check for vulnerabilities in those components. We have software in-house. I just had a developer tell me the other day, this one application that we built for a very, very large manufacturing company, a global, very large. In any event, 10 years old. The library, the open source library that's in that software, which is a commercial piece of software that we go to market with, it's 10 years old. I about fell out of my chair. I'm like, we got to fix that. We have to change that, right? But how? This is challenging. It's a very challenging thing. But itemizing the list, the first step is knowing what you have, right? And before you can fix it, you have to know what you have. And number 10, again, drum roll please, 24/7 eyes on glass. I can't emphasize this enough, how important it is to have somebody watching your environment. If something bad is going to happen, this stat just blows my mind. 206 days. That's the average time. In the industry, we call it dwell time. If somebody compromises your network, on average, 206 days. They're there in 206 days before they're ever discovered. 206 days. That's over 7 months. I could figure out how to harm your business in 7 months, in 200 days. We're detecting intrusions in minutes today. And this is how. It's called, MDR is the solution, right? Managed detection and response. Watching. Have somebody watching your network. It's a very important part, I think, of the aspect. And so, you know, our 24/7 eyes on glass, we look for what are called indicators of compromise, or IOCs, right? That's what they're called in the industry. There are thousands of them, thousands upon thousands upon thousands, and they all get populated in the database. And they're all, from a threat intelligence standpoint, there are all kinds of sources for those, right? So we use, like, I don't know, 12, 15 different sources of IOCs and look for all of them. If somebody's going to move, it's called lateral movement on your network. If somebody's going to move laterally on your network, we're probably going to catch them, right? So the metaphor I use all the time is, we've all seen, like, movies, you know, the crown jewels are sitting in the museum on a pedestal and there's glass around it and there's all these things, and the bad guy shows up, puts a little baby powder in his hand and goes like that, and there are infrared lights shining all over the place that send alarms. That's what it's like looking for an IOC. We call it tripping an IOC, right? How do you get through that? Unless you're a gymnast, you're not getting through it. So I think that's important. But this is my top 10 list. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You said the average is 206 days?
Yeah.
So that means
There's some that are more than that and some that are less than that. Yeah, believe it or not, there are some where the bad guys are. 70% of new clients we sign up for this service, we call it MDR MSOC Plus. 70% of clients already have an attacker on their network. 70%. It's an attacker that's on their network. It's mind-boggling when you think about these things. But
how often should you change the password? Does that help?
yeah, I think every 30 days is reasonable. But most people don't do that because it's hard, right? Unless you can automate it some way. But every quarter, just changing a password that's a good place to start, in my opinion. Just do it. And the reason is because your old password, you probably used it somewhere else and they've probably been breached already. So the consensus in the industry is it's not if, but when, right? And I think that's very reasonable. Know your compliance requirements. So I wanted to include this because compliance comes up a lot. I get a lot of questions around this. Yeah, but what about this? What about that? Compliance says, first of all, compliance can mean a lot of things, right? It can be internal requirements. So if you have internal audit, if you're a larger enterprise and you have internal auditors or an internal audit group, they probably have some requirements, right? It could be external requirements. It could be industry specific. There could be like healthcare and HIPAA, for example. That's a compliance requirement. You have to put those controls in place. And if you're gonna, a lot of times if you're gonna do business with healthcare companies, they make you sign an agreement, it's called a BAA, that says, hey, I'm gonna follow this security rule and put these controls in place and do those things. There are a lot of industries that have very specific compliance requirements, but contractual. So this is one thing that a lot of people miss, right? And we've said for years, IT and legal, they should be friends, man. Like talk to your lawyers, because contracts are a huge part of doing business. Even if you're a startup, you have aspirations. Today, you do business with somebody that's large, or you have aspirations to do business with large. You can't do business with somebody that's large if you don't meet specific requirements, right, from their industry, or that the auto manufacturers, they have compliance requirements. They're starting to integrate cyber into their quality systems and the audit that they do from a quality standpoint. So there are a lot of different angles but know it. know it like the back of your hand and be proactive about it and implement those controls first. So that can influence priority and all kinds of other things. So 3 outcomes you should accomplish. Preventing attacks, that's the best way, right? Just prevent it from happening. The other, if it's gonna happen anyway, which it's likely to, and the statistics today say that it's going to, right? So if you can't prevent it from happening, just minimize the impact, right? From a small and medium business standpoint, a lot of companies can't withstand a data breach. Out of business, lights out. Could be end of story, right? How do you get a customer if you've been breached already, especially if you don't have any controls in place and those kind of things? And then the other thing that we say all the time is practice, practice, practice. So don't make the time that you have an incident, like don't wait until you see that ransomware screen at work. Then who do I call, right? Don't make that the time that you try to figure out those things. Practice it. So have an incident response plan.
So I've been listening to the presentation. It's all very helpful. One thing that's in my mind is, and I guess this ties to COVID in some ways, let's say I find out I have COVID, then I might want to call the people I've been around and say, hey, I just found out I have it, you might want to get checked. What happens when a brand, a business is compromised? How could their customers, vendors, partners, how could they, like what are the methods that their partners, customers, clients, whatever you want to call it, also be compromised? And then part of this incident response plan, who do you email, who do you tell you have COVID? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes great sense.
So how, if
Third-party
something in
risk.
my environment is compromised?
So this is a very common, if I'm an attacker, so I'm thinking, okay, I had an engine repair shop tell me one time, nobody really cares about our data. And I'm like, but your number one customer is GE and they care about their data.
Sure.
So they may leverage you to get to them, right? So compromise the little guy who doesn't spend $1 billion on security, right? It's probably easier. Compromise the little guy and use elevated credentials to get to the bigger fish, right? So this happens all the time. And that's called third-party risk. So the big guys, they have to have a third-party risk problem, and they program in place, and they have to evaluate the risk of their third parties. So, but what your obligations are for notification, a lot of the stats that I've given are specific to reported data breaches. How many of them happen and are not reported, right? If you got breached today, would you be on the phone immediately with the news saying, hey, I just got a data breach, tell all my customers? Probably not. You would probably say, holy shit, whoops, pardon my French, I just was breached. I gotta do everything I can to A, fix the problem and make it look like we didn't even have a problem. That would be even better. That's what most people would do that in a panic situation, and that's why I think practice, and having it.
No, but how? Like, what are the vehicles if my data is compromised, my environment for the businesses that I run? Mm-hmm. How can my customers, vendors, partners, prospects? Is it through email?
Well, credentials is one of them. It depends on what data you have. It depends on a lot of different things, right? But suffice it to say that bad guys will leverage you to get to your customers, especially if you do business with large customers. So there are a lot of different ways they could do that. But a common way is to leverage, like you may have a login to your customer, right? A privileged login to get to sensitive data. And if you have a privileged login, then they'll compromise your account and then to get that privileged account. And if somebody masks themselves as a privileged account, as your account, they won't even be noticed, right? It just looks like a normal login, unless it comes from somewhere else geographically or those kind of, and this is why behaviors is a common thing to look for. Like we have customers that say, look, we have 16 locations, but they're all in the continental US, so there should never be a login to our environment from outside the continental US. And guess what? We saw a login from Nigeria, and we were like, that's a problem. That's behavior analytics, right? So it's looking at behaviors and saying, that should never happen. Like the same person shouldn't log in from two places either, right? These are all indicators of compromise.
One thing we all need to be aware of is if you can get and afford cyber insurance, often the policies require that your first call is to the insurance company.
Right.
So if you call somebody else first, they may not cover anything. And most insurance companies will help you do an incident response plan because there's the media aspect, there's the criminal talking with the FBI, which is a good thing, but people are scared of it. There's a lot of aspects that need to happen. That incident response plan, you really got to invest time.
Right.
And resources.
And a good incident response plan will say, call this person first, call this person second, call this person third. There'll be an escalation plan, a communications plan, all those things. And the vendors that you use will likely change, right? So it's a living, breathing document. It needs to be updated continuously.
Your insurance company has approved policies,
Yep,
and you need to work with
right.
them.
Now, I have this discussion a lot. Personally, call your lawyer first and then call your insurance company. And the reason I do that is because the reason I say that is it's a legal matter, whether you have disclosure requirements or those kind of things. And your lawyer should be familiar with your cyber policy. And if you don't have an internal person that's familiar with your cyber policy, make sure that your lawyer is familiar with your cyber policy. I'm sorry.
Came to the realization of cyber insurance. One of our clients is JPS. The minute they got hacked and it became national, within 48 hours, I got a call from Tyson, Butterball, Unilever, ConAgra, all of them wanting to know what my cyber insurance procedures were. So it's kind of a rude awakening. We have two cyber guys on staff in security. One of them comes in at 5 a.m. to do all the updates. He works from 5 to 1. But we've incentivized these guys to put out phishing tests to all our employees, and they know it's coming. And these guys can get really creative where this thing looks so real. And I've got to deal with my one cyber guy that, if anybody clicks onto it, it automatically notifies everybody.
Right.
He gets $25 every time he can get somebody to click on it. Yeah. So he gets really good and creative. I mean, these things look really nice. But he said the result is his department gets 25 to 30 inquiries every day from our employees and said, can you check out this email before I open it because I don't think it's right. And so it's burying these guys and checking all these things out. But
Right. Well, it's good that your employees are.
well, we
sending
in our
those out.
monthly newsletter, he publishes a horror story every month of what happened to some company,
Right.
just to kind of give them an idea. But a couple of years ago, my CEO's group, we had the head of cybersecurity for the Obama administration come in and talk. And the one thing that really stood out there that I remember is he said, don't piss off the hackers. He said he talked about a client who got hacked and they were watching themselves get hacked. And so they put out a honeypot with a virus. It just pissed off the hacker and all his friends, and that company was put out of business
Yeah.
within months.
That's right.
Everybody, he says, don't piss these guys off. Don't give personal, don't respond.
Right.
He said, if you piss them off and them and all their buddies, you're now a target.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Put that company right up.
Yep. Just paying a rent. I'll share a little anecdote about myself. My philosophy on paying ransoms has changed. I used to be adamantly opposed to it, just like the FBI. I used to think, don't pay the ransom, because as soon as you pay the ransom, you're going to end up on a list. This guy pays the ransom. Let's get him, right? Because everybody's going to say, hey, payday, payday, payday. Don't pay the ransom. Period. But what I realized, and we have customers who have been breached. What I realized is it's a business decision. Sometimes it might make sense to pay the ransom. Sometimes it might make sense not to pay the ransom. So what I decided that our job as a service provider is to put people in a position where not paying the ransom is the best business decision. But it is a business decision.
Hasn't Bitcoin made it a hell of a lot easier for these ransom guys to get their money?
Yeah,
Stay anonymous?
right. I could do this all day. I know we're running out of
We
time.
got a little off schedule, so.
Yep, I want to talk, I'm happy to share this slide deck with anybody who wants it. But I wanted to talk about this giveaway just real quick. So the hackers, we call it the hacker's eye view. Hackers always look from the outside in, right? We have a mechanism, a tool that we use to get the same view that the hackers get, right? So they're looking for vulnerabilities. Like, they use the same cyber tools that we use. Like, for example, they'll scan the network and look for open RDP ports. And if they find one, they already bought an exploit kit for RDP ports, so they know how to do it. So they'll have a list of people to go after that have open RDP ports. It's real easy. Open S3 buckets, whatever the case may be. We can get that same view that the hackers get. And I'm willing to give this to anybody who wants it for free at no charge. And just get a sense from the outside in what your cyber hygiene looks like. So if you want a copy of that, just let me know, and I'm happy to get it for you.
Just absolutely, totally curious here. Is this Russia? Is it China? Where are these hackers? Where are they?
This is anywhere. This is
Yeah,
public.
There's got to be.
Yeah.
West Virginia. There has to be concentrations of. Is it? Are they mostly in Russia? Or are they mostly in China? The most of these hacking individuals, groups, cells, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, they're everywhere. Believe it or not. Like, stay at a hotel.
Does it matter?
When you go to a hotel or a coffee shop,
I just want
yeah. Do you freak out when you see somebody working on their laptop in your hotel lobby that has a suit on and a laptop? They look like a business person. They could be a hacker.
Yeah.
It's a very common tactic, right? So a lot from Russia, a lot from China. There's no question, right? Nation states, we hear all the time about, Russian and Chinese nation state hacking going on. Very sophisticated hacking. There are thousands of hackers. Thousands. It's a business, right? But anyway, I want to mention that. So,
Thank you, Steve, on behalf of the EA. Just a little
well,
token
thank
of our
you. Yeah, I appreciate
appreciation.
that. Thank you.
I'm embarrassed now because we bought him one of those napkin kits, but
Oh, you did? Yeah, that's right.
it's a John Carroll birthday.
I'll be the guy sitting in the lobby.
Yeah, you will.
That's-
Our holiday party, make sure you grab a flyer. The 9th, you can probably RSVP right now, Debbie, right? Or at least the emails will be coming out. So please sign up for that. Tell your friends. We appreciate Steve and your time today. And Becky, of course. Members, the books are in the back. Becky, I don't know if you're signing books
Yeah. Oh, I'd be happy to if somebody wants that.
in the back of the room. So thank you for everybody.